Okay, rotations. Rotation keyword is turn. And unfortunately, it's a little bit harder to do this using your Chromebook because it's a little bit harder to turn your Chromebook to see. It's a little easier on paper. So that's why I'm going to start out by showing you these shortcuts and ways to help you make this a little bit easier. So if you're going to do a 90-degree rotation, now all of these patterns that I'm going to show you are all based on clockwise rotation. So if we have something counterclockwise, we'll talk about how to do that a little later. So go ahead and put the CW to remind yourself these are clockwise rotations. So if we go 90 degrees clockwise, it's like making a quarter turn. So think about if you're on a clock and it's pointing to the 12, this would now point to the 3. So that's a 90-degree rotation. So all you would have to do is flip your X and Y and change the sign of your X. To go 180, that's like going on a clock from 12 to a 6. Now this one could be clockwise or counterclockwise. If you do a 180 rotation, it does not matter which direction you go, you always end up in the same place. All you have to do for that is change the sign of both your X and Y. 270 would be like going from the 12 all the way to the 9, so 3/4 of the way. The pattern for this is to change the sign of the Y and leave the X, but go ahead and flip them around. And then 360 is all the way back around, so there's no change. It's back where it starts. Okay, so let's look at a couple of these samples, and that way I can show you how to do this really easily. So 2 types of rotations, we just talked about that. Clockwise, so like a clock, or going backwards on a clock is counterclockwise. And we have those degrees that we just talked about, and I want you to write a couple of things down. If you're doing a 90-degree rotation, it's a quarter turn. If you're doing 180, it's a half turn. If you're doing 270, it's 3/4 of a turn. And 360 is all the way around, so 1 full turn. Okay, so we just have a couple of problems to do, and my advice always when you're doing rotations is to write down where your coordinates start so that it's easy to do these patterns. And notice here, we are going clockwise. So point A, let's go ahead and count where point A is. Point A is at negative 1, 2, 3, 4 up 2. So negative 4, 2. Point B is at negative 7 up 7. And I can easily count these because these are 10 by 10 grids, so sometimes it's easier to subtract from 10 than count all the way to the 7. And so point C is at negative 3, positive 9. And so now it's going to be really easy to apply these patterns. So I'm going to do the A's with you, and you'll go back and do all the C's on your own. And so a 90-degree rotation, we said for our pattern, was to flip them and change the sign of the X. So if we flip our two numbers, the negative 4 and the 2, so it might be helpful just to go ahead and flip. But then remember, we're changing the sign of the X, so we want to go back in there and take that negative out. Okay, let's do a 180. Remember, the pattern that we wrote down is to change both signs. And so if our point is negative 4, 2, nothing changes here. So I'm going to write down my point. They stay in the same order, but remember we have to change a sign. So I'm going to take the negative off this one and add it to this one. The pattern for 270, we said, was to flip them and change the sign of the Y. Okay, so our numbers are negative 4, 2, so let's flip them. And then we need to change the sign of the Y, so we will add that negative there. Okay, so again, you're going to finish up with the B and the C. Do the same patterns there with them. And then what I would like for you to do is go in and graph. So I'm going to graph the A's with you to show you how I want you to do it. When you finish, you'll have 4 triangles on here. So if we do the 90-degree rotation first, 2, 4, over 2 at 4, we can see point A is right here. And I'm going to label that A prime. Then we're going to do the 180 rotation. That's at 4, negative 2. So right 4, down 2. Now because this is a new triangle, I'm going to name it prime prime with 2 there. Okay? And then we're going to end up at -2, -4. So left 2, down 4. And because it's our third one, we would put 3 primes. So you're going to do the same thing with B's and C's and then connect your triangles together. So you'll have your prime triangle after the 90 rotation, you'll have 2 primes after 180, and then 3 primes after the 270.